Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Ella Teaches English. Today we're going to talk about what a complete beginner should do to maximize his or her progress. Or if you're not a beginner, you're in a vague, nebulous phase of your learning journey and what you should do accordingly.In Chinese, we call it an 英语零基础应该如何系统规划自己的学习，并且如果你不是零基础的话，你在进展到每个阶段的时候应该怎么样调整你的学习计划。So, step number 1 is to buy my brand new book, a complete comprehensive guide to learning any foreign language, not just English. Buying some kind of guide is a guarantee that you'll save a lot of time because you just took out the trial and tribulation time. You stop messing around with different methods that don't necessarily work for you, and you borrow someone's ideas and then you just reap the benefits of someone else's hard work. So any kind of guidebook doesn't have to be mine. Again, not to toot my own horn, but I've put years of research, years of just experience into it. I have hundreds of students, both online and offline, in the forms of my courses, in the forms of my one-on-one students. So when I speak, hopefully it has some weight to it. Okay. And in the book, there's a questionnaire where you can kind of just gauge where you're at in terms of your journey. And towards the end, there's a bunch of commonly asked questions, frequently asked questions that you can just navigate to and figure out, oh, this is where I did wrong, this is where I did right. A huge time saver. Time is money. You want to do it. It's so cheap. You know, you go out and you take courses, you take classes. They're not trying to necessarily teach you how to do things.The way that they make money is by trapping you in their system so that you continue to take courses over and over again or classes over and over again. So this is the antithesis of that. Like, I don't want you to take classes with me. That's not how I learned my English. Sure, there are times where you'll need a monitoring system, be it a mentor or someone to hold you accountable, maybe an accountability buddy, so that you not only know how, but you can put it to practice. You put your money where your mouth is, you know, your logical understanding and your actions kind of stay consistent, stay coherent with one another, which is something that my students and myself struggle with. You know, I'm learning French now, and sometimes when there's no one calling me up being like, hey, did you study French today? Like my dad did for me when I was learning English, it becomes a bit boring and unmotivating to keep going. But that's another issue. So step number 1, buy my book or any kind of guidebook so that you know what you're doing, you know what resources, what tools, what materials to get, and you know you can kind of gauge your progress throughout the way. Step number 2 is to specify and quantify your goal. What do I mean by that?A lot of people go into learning English in this vague, broad idea that, oh, I just want to speak, or like, I just want to improve my English. Oftentimes it's like, oh, I want to practice my spoken English, or, oh, I want to just like vaguely improve my English somehow. It's not quantified. So when I went into my English learning journey, I was very specific about, okay,During my first 6 months, I just want to fully master or do my best to fully master the most common 3,000 words. In terms of vocab, that's how you quantify it, right? But let's say you're still working on your grammar, you're still working on your pronunciation, which is what you should do in the beginning before you even start accumulating vocab. Yeah, you can also quantify how many pronunciation tips or rather phonetic symbols do you know?How many phonetic symbols do you not know, or liaison patterns, connected speech patterns? There's only so many of them. There's only so many grammar rules. So you can keep track of things in that way, in a quantified, specified way. And another way to quantify your progress is by telling you how many hours you should study or how many words you should encounter every day. What I don't want you to quantify is how many words you should memorize, because I personally don't memorize vocab, be it for English or for French. But I do give myself the rule of, I should read 100 words today. I should read 200 words today. I should put an hour into my study today. Or I should put in, like, if you're busy, maybe 2 hours a week. and just keep it consistent. When you can specify and quantify everything, you know when it's not going well that, oh, it's probably I didn't put in enough hours, or like maybe my input isn't enough in terms of time, in terms of just the words I encounter. Another downside of just quantifying how many words you memorize, you would think, oh, you're doing so much work, you're actually forcing yourself to directly force yourself to remember all these words, but you actually haven't read enough. You haven't seen these words or heard these words in different contexts. How would you be able to, one, understand what they mean, for one, and two, be able to use them yourself in a natural way, in an immediate and appropriate way. So that's my little caveat when it comes to quantifying your goal, whether it's your daily goal or your weekly goal or your short-term or long-term goal. So my long-term goal in the beginning was just keeping everything within that 3,000 range. And then as far as my French goes, I haven't thought that far, but in a way, I also limited everything. Like I was listening to this French podcast, and sometimes they use words that I know for sure I'm not going to be able to use in the near future, so I just ignored them. I kept everything within that 3,000 range. And with my daily goal, like I try to keep it down. Like that's another secret too. Keep everything short. Okay, when you're a beginner, you don't want to do too much too soon. Like I kept it within 30 minutes in the beginning and then gradually move up to 45 minutes or an hour. Surprisingly, when you start low and have low expectations for yourself, you want to keep going. You want to push yourself more. Whereas if you just start out with 2 hours every day, you're not going to keep going for very long. Step number 3 is to know where you're currently at. This is a little hard to understand if you're a complete beginner or you haven't encountered many videos like this guiding you like systematically, but reading my book will help. Specifically checking out the questions in the questionnaire and like see what the end result yields will help you understand what your current level is at. But as a general rule of thumb, this is how you know, okay? If you have a bit of basics, let's say you went to school for English, you took some classes, you have tried different textbooks, you have a basic level of vocab, like you know some basic words. You've never learned how to construct a sentence from scratch, you never learned pronunciation lessons, then you want to stick to those 2 elements first, okay? And I have just a course for that I just put out a while ago. Honing in on your pronunciation and grammar has several benefits. One, there's only so many grammar rules, there's only so many pronunciation rules that you might as well just get them over with. Unlike vocabulary, there's always going to be a new word that you don't understand. The scope of knowledge when it comes to pronunciation and grammar is pretty finite. Another benefit, which is now when you listen to a material or when you read the material, all there is that you don't know is just words and expressions. This is going to help you because sometimes you may not understand or have seen a word, but because you have a full understanding of the sentence structure, you can kind of deduce what the word is, or at least you'll know what parts of speech this word is. And it's a lot easier to guess than what this word is about. By contrast, if your grammar skill is lacking, a lot of times you will understand every single word on its own, but somehow you can't make sense of the full sentence. And this is even more apparent in listening, because listening essentially is just a faster reading. It's a reading material without hesitation, without going back to the sentence over and over again. So if your grammar skill is lacking, sometimes you don't even know where a sentence ends. And it doesn't matter how slow you put the reading or listening material to. It doesn't matter if you know every single word in the sentence. If you're a complete beginner, like this is the first time you're learning English for real, you've never been to a class, you've never taken a course, you've never watched a video on English, then it's a different story. I would suggest then to pick a language material, like a language textbook that is authentic, that has everyday common phrases, that is mostly based on conversations. So Family Album USA, if you're feeling adventurous, you can just start watching an American sitcom or an American TV show. And you're doing this, you're picking up on new words, as well as learning these grammar rules based on context, as well as learning pronunciation tips based on context. it's a little more mechanical if you just start learning grammar on its own. It's a little too isolated if you don't have some kind of context to back up. Tip number 4, divide your general studies into different phases. So we've already talked about phase 0 should be getting your basics down, okay? Basics in terms of your grammar, pronunciation, done. And then we move on to phase 1, which is getting your 3,000 words input by reading a article or preferably reading English books or American TV shows, because those words oftentimes are within that 3,000 range. Unlike TED Talks or YouTube videos, YouTube vlogs, or even podcasts, there's a lot of unknown, both in terms of how common this word is and in terms of, when you're listening to a podcast, there's usually not a text. There's usually no script. So you don't know what word you're missing. Sometimes on Bilibili, there's like subtitles. There's Chinese subtitles for a popular YouTuber, but you don't know how accurate it is. You don't know how accurate the translation is. You want to look out for materials that are authentic, but also common and popular enough that there's a text, a transcript to it. There's official English subtitles and pretty accurate Chinese translation as well. For instance, I'm learning French right now. I've tried French textbooks before. Recently, I just started to watch these 2 French guys talking on camera in a podcast conversational format, and they put dual subtitles, French and English subtitles, right next to each other, and the words I'm pretty sure are within the most common range. And on YouTube, I can put it to 0.5 speed, so it will help my pronunciation. It will help me understand by listening. So that's phase 1, and you should stick with this phase for 3 to 6 months. Sometimes it will take longer if you can only spend like 20 minutes or 10 minutes a day. But overall, people underestimate the power of consistency and overestimate what they can do on a daily basis. They always want to do too much too soon. And I would say try to keep your weekly goal at either 2 to 3 hours per week or 500 to 1,000 words per week. How many words you should encounter, how many words you should read, not how many words you should memorize. And then phase 2 is all about improving the quality of your input by not just learning the phrases in this particular context, learn how to use them in this particular scenario. Improving the quality of your input goes beyond just learning these words in this particular context, in this particular scenario. You actually have to look up these words in a dictionary and see what other ways you could use this word. So words like engage, for instance. Engage is such a complex word that doesn't translate well into Chinese. You can say, I'm engaged in some criminal activity, or you can say, I'm engaged to him, as in you're getting married soon. Or you can use engage as a verb, being like a speaker, a public speaker. A good public speaker should engage his or her audience. So it's very hard to either translate that word or just give one meaning to that word. So when you get to phase 3, maybe 6 months later, you can start reading the dictionary a lot more or reading way more complicated materials and see these words in a different context. Another way to go about it is to improve your output. This is when you start writing more and start speaking to yourself more. But if you're speaking to yourself, you got to make sure you're recording everything, because a lot of times you don't catch your mistakes, both in terms of your pronunciation or grammar and in terms of how you put these words together. Sometimes the way you put 2 words together are not necessarily accurate. But if you write things down, if you record yourself, you'll have a record. You can go back and look it up using a dictionary or using AI or having a physical teacher to correct you. We have to live to be corrected. People either don't practice output whatsoever, like in a controlled environment, they just want to start talking to native speakers right away, or they get too liberal with the words, with the phrases that they put together. There's no like monitoring or correction of any kind, and they end up saying something that only they can understand, or only fellow Chinese speakers can understand. So we don't want to do that. And I'll talk more about how to turn your input into output in a different video. I've mentioned it before, but I don't think I did a good job explaining it. I want to make another video being even more specific, even more detailed, but that's for another video. Finally, I want to also give you this idea of big picture thinking. You have to think globally, think with a big picture, but act locally, act with daily realistic actions. A lot of people either think too myopically and just focus on immediate instant gratification, like, oh, I want to be able to travel to America and speak with the locals in 2 months or a month. That's too aggressive of a goal. You have to realize that just because you learned 旅游500句, 商务英语500句, just because you can recite these phrases doesn't mean you have any sort of understanding of what the native speaker will speak back to you. They, at any given moment, like any native speaker, an adult native speaker, will probably have 20 years or 30 years of English under their belt. They've read so many books, watched so many TV shows, read so many articles by the time you're talking to them. So even though you can recite these phrases in one go, your 旅游500句, sure, you can recite it to them, but you will have no understanding what they're going to say back to you. Sometimes they will assume you know more English than you actually do, and then you run into the pickle of, oh, shoot, what are they talking about? That happened to me, so I'm not dissing anyone. I'm not looking down on anyone. I'm just telling you this is what is going to happen. But if you're also just focusing on big picture stuff like, oh, 5 years later, 10 years later, I will finally be able to figure out this English thing, then you don't think of the stuff that you can do today. You don't have that sense of urgency anymore. So we want to take the best of both worlds, both think broadly enough that like this is a long-term goal, but also think of what you can do today to get yourself closer to that goal, which I think is what you should do with everything that you want to achieve, every goal that you're after. Say you want to lose weight, say you want to make more friends, say you want to not be single anymore. You should have a general long-term goal, a North Star of some sort, but you should also narrow it down to what you can do today, right this moment, and be happy about it, be excited about it. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Most people are not trying. Most people don't have a systematic way to go about it. Most people are really whimsical about it. Like, oh, they want to travel to America or they want to travel to Germany. Then let's learn German or let's learn French, English. It's very willy-nilly. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to cram for something when we need something. Let's practice now. Let's have a plan now, right? Buy my book, buy my course. Love you guys. I'll see you in the next one.